They beat down not a great team in the San Antonio Spurs, but they get a definitive win. I mean, they win by 20 plus points last night. And so with that being the case, it was something that I found very interesting, Blake. Right? 116-93 is the final score. Your tent poles that are going to bring offense, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. But it actually really felt like it was a defensive-led effort. Obviously, again, the Spurs, they can go on cold streaks and those type of things. But Victor Wembanyama came out strong and was hitting early, and then he cooled, even though he did not play a ton of minutes. He's been playing kind of relatively limited minutes at that. But the head coach of this Dallas Mavericks basketball team kind of talked about the improvement that you've seen defensively. And he actually talked about PJ Washington saying, quote, he's guarding everyone and he's guarding them at a high level. So that gives us depth to be able to play him on bigs or bigger wings or even smalls. So to just see that here in a short time, his defense is above par. We need that defensively. I think he and Maxey give us something we can definitely use going down the stretch here. And so you have that. PJ Washington was switched onto Wemby, and that's when you really saw him kind of slow down. On top of that, I found this really interesting, Blake. They've been 4-0 since the trade deadline. If you look at defensive rating since the trade deadline, which again, 1 week, we can only do so much. However, where do you think the Mavericks rank defensive rating since the trade deadline?
Numero uno.
Number one, and by a large margin. Their defensive rating is 100.7. The number 2 team is the Phoenix Suns with 107.3. Like a good 7-point difference thereabouts in defensive rating. That's a huge distinction. Now, of course, you've played a couple of teams that aren't that good, but you've done an incredible job. So with all that being the case, Blake, could this be a great defense on the low down the stretch for these Mavs?
Yeah, so I'm in the space where I'm trying to be cautious and giving them the great label yet. I think it's safe to say that it's improved. And I'll even go to what Getty Lively had to say about PJ after the game. He said he's been a pest, talking about PJ Washington. He's been a pest. He's been exactly what we needed. He's exceeded everything. He's able to talk. He's always in passing lanes. He's always trying to cover somebody's back. That's what we need. His energy and effort out there are amazing. And so as much as I am being cautious with calling him a great defense,
sure,
PJ Washington's effort and hustle, I don't think it's something that's just going to come and go.
Yes. That's
something that you can kind of put some stock into. You can put some bets into as far as just him hustling, being in the passing lanes. I think it's quite interesting with PJ Washington has only played 88 minutes for the Dallas Mavericks. In those 88 minutes, they've outscored opponents by 51 points. These are just PJ Washington being on the court, what the impact is. And in that stretch, the Mavs are shooting 29% from three and 52% from the field, but they're holding opponents to shooting 37% from the field and 23% from three.
Right.
So he's not giving you the box score, maybe numbers that people were looking for, the 28 game, which is cool and I think will come.
Yeah, the shooting definitely has been a struggle for him early.
But I think, like you mentioned, how he guarded Wemby was great. I was watching, I rewatched the game and just watched him guarding Wemby. They did that a lot in the second half, and him being able to match up and be physical with them, and then also getting some blocks and being in the passing lanes. I think it's something that you're going to see improve more and more and more. And that's not even talking about Luka, who I think has taken great strides in his defensive prowess. I'm not calling him a two-way Kawhi Leonard or anything, but he is no longer, if you call Luka a cone or a weak defender, then you're just not watching basketball. I really don't know what to say. I'm not saying he's a top 5 defender, but they pulled up plenty of metrics: ISO defenders, post defenders, spot up defenders, and he ranks top 10 in all 3 of those. I'm not taking us to the bank and saying he's the best. I'm just saying he's improved more than 0.1. Like, he has shown a great improvement. Kyrie Irving's all over the steals and whatnot. In that OKC game, they held them to shooting just 38%. In the Washington game, 41%. And in the Spurs game, 36%. I don't know how many times we've seen the Mavs play defense over this stretch so well. And that's not even talking about the rebounding. The Mavs had one game where they had 50 plus rebounds over the 52. With PJ and Daniel Gafford, they've yet to have a game below 50 rebounds.
Right, and so these are the things that I'm starting to look at as, I have been pretty tepid about the ways in which this defensive ability can really shift with a couple of moves. But over the 4 games, we've seen that kind of show up, and there's a couple of things. PJ Washington, I mean, you mentioned how well he played against Victor Wembanyama, a young player, but he poses really significant challenges.
He can really guard 1 through 5. Like, that's not exaggerating.
Right. And so, like, the ways in which, okay, if you can guard pretty comfortably a guy who poses those kind of problems, like, what then do you see against anyone else, any other great player in the league, right? Like, I do think that means that you have a player that is capable of giving any of those players a little bit of a challenge, which is, I think that's really the expectation when you talk about high-level defense in the league at this point, especially considering how good players in the league are offensively. If you can give them a challenge, you've done something here, right? And so I think PJ Washington is showing that, in addition to being able to, like, and as I think you kind of alluded to, make some little plays where you poke the ball here or you get in passing lanes or, you know, those types of things. And then also, you also have Daniel Gafford, who I don't want to leave out here, because this game yesterday with the Washington Wizards, it gave you an opportunity to see something that we were looking forward to, which is the 2 energetic rim protecting or capable of rim protecting bigs that you have there. And what you were able to see is, like, at any given time, they were pretty much on the floor, and it made it so that getting to the paint against this Mavs team was not as easy. And more importantly, they picked up a lot of rebounds, as you alluded to. And one of the things that this team needed to do was cap off defensive possessions, right? Defense is only so good as you finishing off the possession, which is getting the rebound if after a miss. These guys
they used to be terrible at that.
Awful at that. You had many games where Luka Doncic was your best rebounder, understanding that he's not going to be a guy who's down low. And then also, if he's getting a rebound, it probably means that, you know, some people left. Everybody did not crash, those types of things. These guys getting rebounds, it doesn't matter if you send folks in, they can contend for rebounds, and you're able to really, you know, end possessions and not give second chance points, which ends up being an issue. And then on top of that, and I believe it might have been something that Jason Kidd said at one point, is what's happening here in addition to this is now these, or actually it's Talk Franco, writes for D Magazine, fantastic basketball writer, wrote the idea that what Washington and Gafford will do also is that they just push more flawed defensive players off the floor more often. So some of this is not even just about what they intrinsically bring themselves, but the difference between the deficit that you had before. Like, imagine having Dwight Powell on the floor compared to Daniel Gafford. It's not just the difference of Daniel Gafford to the average, it's the difference of Daniel Gafford from Dwight Powell when he's on the floor against bigs that are tough, or Jaden Hardy, or Tim Hardaway, or Seth Curry. Like, those guys are now not on the floor nearly as much for other teams to attack, and now you have guys that are not easy to attack. I think that this really shifts the way that this defense is situated.
And I think another part, kind of talking about how the rotation works, now Maxi Kleber is using his best role as like a 4 and then a stretch 5 if you need to go small and whatnot. He's not like, hey, we need you to be Lively's out of the lineup, but we really need you to really be the 5 for pretty much the whole game. He can come in spots and play his role correctly. Derrick Jones Jr. does not have to be the second tallest dude out there trying to contend for rebounds against some of these bigger guys. He can play the 3 most of the time with PJ out there or Maxi out there at the 4 and then Lively or Gafford at the 5. So I think it does slot guys in a lot better, and you're going to see the best Derrick Jones Jr. because now he has 2 guys that are taller than him on the floor contending for rebounds, and he can help and kind of get those tip-out rebounds. And you have Maxi Kleber that can stretch the floor, knock down shots, and also his defense. I want to take a moment to his defense has been really good since he's come back. He's been really good at a guy that can switch, a guy that can close out.
He's always been a solid defender, and my issue when people talked about Maxi Kleber in previous years was people talked about him like he was Kevin Garnett.
Like he was an anchor.
And he's not. But one thing that he is a defensive player, or a player that has enough defense that, especially if he's in the right circumstances and surrounded by other players that can play defense, it can shine. And I think that's some of what you've done here, right? And 817, I know Seth Curry isn't on the floor because he's traded. That's part of the point, is now you have some of these guys that are on the floor instead of the guys that were previously on the floor that were flawed in the ways that they play. But yeah, Maxi Kleber, absolutely in the context, right? I think that if Grant Williams was still here, I understand. Like, we don't have to go down that road necessarily, but if Grant Williams was still here in this context, it makes him better as well. Because again, I don't know that you have a player that's like, defensively, I am going to be this level of great every time.
That's what I want to do.
But the more that you have guys around each other that are good defensively, they kind of amplify each other in their defensive acumen.
I think we saw this quite quickly. PJ and Gafford were on 2 losing teams for pretty much most of their career. Gafford with the Bulls and Wizards, and PJ's always been with Charlotte. Those teams have never really won. I think that Gafford Bulls team, I think they might have made the playoffs and played a couple games, but they were never really contending.
Yeah. I think he has like 4 games in the playoffs.
He is now on a team that I'm not saying they're the 1 seed, but they're contending. They have a top 5 player. They have Kyrie, who is looking like an all-star snub at this point, the way he's been playing this month. And like I think it's a reinvigoration in them. Like, hey, I can play my role and I could be on a championship roster rather than just put up empty stats.
Sure.
And just do this. Like, if I go get rebounds and outlet pass and play good defense, we could be making a deep playoff rush. And I think they realize that, and they're not trying to do too much. You don't see PJ and Gafford just chucking up shots left and right. Like, I want PJ to shoot. I want him to get confident. And I think that will come in. Gafford, every time he puts up a shot, it feels like a high-quality shot because he's right around the rim. And I'm like, hey, you get the rebound, big boy, go put it back up. And he's shooting pretty high efficiency right now for the team. So I like everything that the new guys are bringing. It's not the flash that I think some people wanted in a Kyle Kuzma or Jeremy Grant or Barnes or Siakam, which at first we didn't even think about these guys. Remember when we first were doing the trade talk, we didn't even think about them, didn't know they were available and whatnot. And the closest we got to it, I was like, this is kind of the right remedy they needed. Defense and rebounding and guys that know the role and want to excel in that high energy defensive rebounding role.
On the truckwreck.com text line, somebody asked, does Gafford have the same switchability as, say, like a Nick Claxton? Nope. And no, but it's like that's going to be something that is going to be a possible weak point when he is on the floor. But I think one thing that you have situated, and right now he's still starting, I think Derek Lively probably is your starter, or maybe situationally you can move them because I think you've made note of this a lot. They are 2 bigs that have energy that can, really contend at the rim, but they also have different strengths. Gafford, a little bit stronger of a guy, a little bit older, has a little bit more experience in understanding kind of the tricks of the trade as a center. And so I imagine that if you have maybe more plotting, a little bit stronger bigs, he can contend with them maybe a little bit better than Lively. But Lively seems to have a lot more lateral quickness, a little bit more foot speed, and so he can get out closer to the perimeter and guard out that. And I think that you have 2 guys that provide you together an opportunity to match up pretty nicely with most bigs in this league.
I think when we got Gafford, I think a lot of people wanted him to be a perfect center, and the reality is he's a backup center, so he's going to have some deficiencies. He's not Jokic. He's not going to be A+ at everything. He gave you what you needed: rebounding, defense, brute strength in the middle, and you still have I was going to say 19-year-old rookie. 20-year-old
That's right. Get it right.
Derek Lively just had his birthday the other day. That you still can play as well. So you're going to play them to their strengths and weaknesses. And hopefully Jason Kidd will know who's on the floor and play the correct person. Like, you're going to see when Rashawn Holmes is out. Or no, Rashawn Holmes. When Daniel Gafford
There we go.
When Daniel Gafford's out there, it's going to be a lot more drop coverage on those screens. He's not going to be stepping up on there because he's not laterally quick enough to get and cover the backside of the rim. So when there's a guard that can't shoot that well, that's doing a lot of pick and rolls, Gafford, you won't see, it won't be that bad if he's out there. When SGA is out there, you probably won't see that much of him in the pick and roll because SGA will be able to shoot the mid range and kind of pick that apart. But Lively, I think, is going to be a great supplement to them, hopefully. And think about this. This is what I think Nick Angstead of Locked On Mavs pointed this out, and this is a good point. Think about who Derek Lively, outside of Tyson Chandler, who's outside the game, has had to lean on for center expertise. Dwight Powell and Maxi Cleaver. Love those guys. Wouldn't say they're exactly the prototypical center. You now have Daniel Gafford that you can kind of lean on for, post moves and working against the guys in the post. So I think Derek Lively is going to get even better, and they can kind of feed off of each other. So I don't see this being a minus in any way. You're not asking Gafford to play all 48 and be perfect. He's going to give you his strengths, and then Lively will supplement it. And then you got Josh Green stepping up on the defensive side. You got PJ Washington, Luka playing good defense.
Right.
Kyrie sneakily plays good defense. He's not going to stand in front of someone and lock him down and body them up. He's still a small guard. But
Kyrie plays good defense, the good defense of a bad guard, or like a bad defensive guard.
I'll take it.
And it's one of my pet peeves as a basketball fan, like the idea that, oh man, look at all these steals. They're good at defense. Steals are not necessarily indicative of good defense because a lot of times it's gambles, but he has been good at getting in the passing lanes, getting steals in that way, and that's useful and it's helpful for sure.
I'll take a poke every once in a while.
All right.
What? I'm not asking Kyrie to be the glove or anything.
Sure.
But Kyrie and Luka 2 years ago, they were both cones.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Okay, so with that, all this being said, we've really waxed poetic about this, new look Mavs team, 4-0 since the trade deadline. Of course, one of those games did not really include the new guys, but still, right? 4-0 since the trade deadline. literally the best defensive rating since then. But again, 4-game sample size is not very big, and I imagine I don't want to speak for you. Do you think they're going to go undefeated for the rest of the season?
I don't know, man.
I'm going on a real.
I know they can only lose 9 more games to win 50.
I'm going on a real ledge here, saying they're not going to go undefeated the rest of the season. But with that being the case, right? Like, I understand people hesitant to talk about it being a great defense, but like, what do we think it can be now looking forward? Because now we've gotten a little bit more of some sample, and it's a sample against some teams that aren't the greatest necessarily, but what do we now see? Because they've looked way better than I anticipated they would look defensively, even this quickly, not having like all of these things together.
I think the biggest thing now, and Jason Kidd, I think talked about this in the first or second game, you're just very switchable now. We're in a space before where if guys would set pick and rolls, you were like, oh gosh, we got this guy on that. PJ and Luka, they can switch and one be on a guard, one be on a big. It's not the end of the world. Now, do I want Gafford guarding my point guard? Probably not. But outside of that, you can put a lot of different combinations. You can put Derrick Jones Jr. and Josh and Hardy and PJ and Gafford out there. I feel like you still got a pretty good defensive line. Outside of maybe the Clippers, who have a lot of ball handlers that can get creative and a lot of space makers, other than that, there's a lot of teams I think you match up decently with now, like the Nuggets. I don't think you're going to shut them down and they're not going to score anymore. But I think better than before, you feel a lot more comfortable going into it with the defensive matchups you can throw out there with Maxey and Gafford and Lively and Green and Derrick Jones and PJ. Like, there's just a lot of different things you can do. You can go small ball. We haven't even seen PJ at the small ball 5, which Nico and Jason Kidd both said they want to introduce at some point. So, like, there's a lot of different variabilities that we have now. When I felt like we were very one-dimensional on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, I feel like on both rounds we've become a little bit more versed.